For more great retail real estate content, like, share, and subscribe.
Let's talk about the main players in a retail real estate lease transaction. So every retail real estate deal is going to have a landlord and a tenant. There are probably going to be two sets of brokers and two sets of lawyers. So let's start with which probably the easiest. That's the tenant. If you are a retailer looking to open a bricks and mortar location in space that you do not own, congratulations, you're a tenant. And people in the commercial real estate world may call you a retailer, but they may call you a tenant. And that's why. The person whose space you're using, who you are renting or leasing a space from, that is the landlord. And we use landlord in the singular sense like that, which seems to convey like just one guy who owns the building and is the sole decision maker. That can be true, but in lots of cases, it's a bigger company that is the landlord with its own internal hierarchies and decision-making process and motivations that are very different from an individual. So your broker can be really helpful in, putting some meat on the bones as to what motivates this particular landlord. Because you can imagine if it's a single individual who owns a freestanding retail storefront, and let's say it's their retirement, your rent coming in, they're going to be really concerned about your monthly rent, but probably aren't going to care about your hours of operation so much. On the other side, what if your landlord is a big commercial landlord and your space is on the ground floor of a really big office building, and they're hoping that your tenant, you as a tenant, are going to be a great amenity to the office users that work upstairs. And so they're actually going to be able to charge them more in rent because you're down there. That landlord's going to care about totally different things. And so this is part of why every deal is so different, because the types of landlords can range so dramatically. So your broker really will be a helpful asset in figuring out what's going to be most important to the type of landlord you're working with. I mentioned your broker. I said most transactions will have two sets of brokers, one representing the landlord, one representing the tenant. It is the job of the brokers to matchmake landlord and tenant, or really more to matchmake tenant and space. And it is also their job to negotiate the main business terms, advise on those business terms relative both to market and to the goals of their client. It can be ambiguous sometimes when you walk into a space and a broker meets you and shows you the space. You may not know, well, does this broker represent me or do they represent the landlord? First and foremost, ask. If you're not sure who a broker represents, ask the question. You are not being foolish to ask. But probably if you don't know whether somebody represents you, I would assume they don't. The other thing to know about brokers is that they are paid in commissions if and only if a lease is signed. So they get paid usually entirely at the end of the deal, only once a lease is signed. So the last important players are lawyers, and they are the ones who are going to be negotiating the leases. And again, a landlord is probably going to have their own lawyer, and you're going to have your own lawyer. If you've ever tried to read a commercial lease or even a residential lease, you'll see that it is written in really dense legalese that is like a language of its own. These lawyers are both fluent in legalese, and so you really want to have one in your corner, because for laymen to try to understand the legal implications of the lease, just get a lawyer. You'll be glad you did. So lawyers, unlike brokers, are paid, they are fee-based. They're not paid on commissions, and they are paid whether a lease gets signed or not. The most typical structure is for them to be paid hourly, though that can be different. But because of the way they're compensated, this is why we don't have brokers, this is why we don't have lawyers negotiate LOIs. The whole transaction would be a lot more expensive if we did it that way. So to recap, main players that you have to have in any retail lease transaction: landlord and tenant. And then most transactions are going to have a broker representing the landlord, a broker representing the tenant, a lawyer representing the landlord, and a lawyer representing the tenant.